Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Sabo, President and CEO of the Arizona Lodging and Tourism Association, and I thank each of you for joining us today for the first in a series of Tourism Talk webinars for 2021. We've got a great program for you today. I'm very excited, and we have a stellar group of panelists, industry leaders that will be fantastic for you all to listen to today. But before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's generous sponsor, HSL Properties. We all know that without our sponsorships, none of this could be possible. So I thank HSL for your continued investment in the advocacy work we do here at AZLTA on behalf of our businesses. Thank you, HSL. Well, we all know that 2021 has certainly seen the start of another challenging year for this industry, but I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And today we're going to talk about where we're headed, the road to recovery. We're going to discuss tools, resources, and policies that will be critical to the recovery of this industry. We're going to touch on the American Rescue Plan, COVID-19 exposure liability legislation, the role of vaccines in restarting travel, the importance of safely restoring business, travel, meetings, and events. We do indeed have a stellar all-star lineup of panelists. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming our guests. First, please welcome President and CEO of Arizona's very own Best Western Hotels and Resorts, Mr. David Kong. David is truly an industry icon and the longest running CEO of the top 10 major global hotel chains. We're incredibly blessed to have Best Western's global headquarters right here in Phoenix, literally less than a mile down the road from where I sit right now. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next, please join me in welcoming Director of State Government Affairs for Marriott International, Travis Cutler. Travis has been a vital advocacy partner to the AZLTA and has joined us on so many efforts, most recently advocating for the hospitality workforce prioritization for vaccinations, amongst many other industry recovery policies. So Travis, thank you again for your partnership and for working in lockstep with the AZLTA every step of the way.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And finally, please join me in welcoming the President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, Chip Rogers, the ultimate quarterback for this industry. Chip, we thank you for your extraordinary team and your leadership during these most challenging of times, and for the unwavering support you provide the industry nationwide. We couldn't be in better hands as we navigate the worst crisis this industry has ever seen.
Well,
And
Kim,
speaking of, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for having me. I've never been called the ultimate quarterback. I guess that would be Tom Brady or an Arizona Cardinal lore, Kurt Warner maybe. But thank you.
I was thinking of throwing out the Tom Brady thing, but you're the quarterback of this industry, and we're blessed to have you at the helm.
Thank you.
So speaking of crisis, I hate to do this, but I feel as though it's important to set the table and really reflect on the devastating numbers that this industry has been hit with over the course of the last year. 2020 was the worst year on record for the hotel industry. COVID-19 wiped out 10 years of job growth. It has hurt our communities and decimated our workforce. With record low occupancy, the industry surpassed 1 billion unsold room nights for the first time in history, eclipsing the 786 million that went unsold during the global financial crisis in 2009. So these are just staggering numbers. And while leisure travel has helped keep the lights on, for some, it's important to highlight that business travel accounts for 60 to 65% of all industry revenue. And a report from AHLA Chip Shop says that in 2021, business travel will still be down 85% compared with 2 years ago. And overall, the industry is bracing for years of additional potential pain. Travel won't return to 2019 levels until 2024. And here in Arizona, we've certainly not been immune. During the height of the pandemic, We lost nearly 50% of Arizona hospitality jobs. We've lost more than $1.3 billion in hotel revenue and more than $300 million in state and local tax revenue. And nearly 12 billion with a B, $12 billion in direct visitor spending. And although we're definitely seeing much better days than we were a year ago, there's still much to be done. I'd like to open up today's conversation by going to each of you and asking you to please reflect on the past year, what the industry's been through, and through your eyes, where we go from here. Chip, I'll start with you.
Well, it's been painful. And the reason it's so painful is because these are real lives, real jobs, real businesses, real American dreams that have been crushed over the last year. You know, it's interesting. I think one of the biggest misperceptions about our industry is that because there are big names on the top of these hotels, like a Best Western or a Marriott, that people think that these are global corporations that own and operate all these hotels and that they're public and that they haven't really been hurt by this. The reality is that these companies, these corporations and this industry is made up of small business owners, very similar to restaurants. The franchise model is alive and well in the US and that's what we thrive on. But we have a hard time getting policymakers to understand, you know, that these are small business owners. And that's what the last year, why it's been so painful. Boy, I know through my years in this industry, and Travis and David know this as well, the families that you meet that have built these businesses from the ground up, and some of them couldn't make it through this, and you see their American dream washed away through no fault of their own. They didn't make any bad decisions. That's the most painful part of this. Hopefully we're in the rebuild stage. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully everybody can make it. But we're still struggling, as you pointed out, Kim. This is not something that's going to correct itself in 2021 or possibly even 2022. And so the struggle is real, the pain is real, and it impacts people's livelihoods on a daily basis.
Most definitely, and I couldn't agree more. This is a misunderstood, if you will, industry that's far more complex than I think most policymakers realize. David, I'd like to go to you with the next, to give your perspective on the same thing.
Now, I've been in the industry for a very long time. I recall back in the 70s when I was in Hawaii, there was an oil embargo and airlift to the islands were severely impacted. To most recently in 2009, when we had that downturn and industry revenue was down by 16.5%. We all thought it was bad. Little did we know this nightmare of COVID-19 hit us, and we're still rearing from it. It's just been absolutely horrible, as Chip had mentioned. And if you think about being in the hotel industry right now, you have pain all around you. You have to make really difficult decisions to separate from people. You've basically depleted your reserves to sustain the operation. You're facing supply shortages. You're facing labor shortages to staff your hotel. You're pulling shifts just to make ends meet. And, you know, just the pain and suffering is so tremendous. I just wish the government would realize that most of the industry is comprised of smaller businesses, hardworking men and women trying to earn an honest living. And we create lots of jobs. And that $1.some billion in revenue that we lost, it's lost forever. That $12 billion in travel spend, it's lost forever. And it's been extremely difficult. And I was just so disappointed with the last round of government relief that the hotel industry wasn't included. I mean, it's like, why? The airlines got help, the restaurant industry got help, but the hotel industry didn't. So it's just rather unfair, and I wish that our government officials and Congress in particular would realize that we are Main Street, we're not Wall Street.
Absolutely, great point. And we are not going to stop advocating until we get some critical relief to these small businesses. Travis, I'll go to you next, because with Marriott International, again, this is a misconception. It's Marriott International, a huge global corporation, but talk to us a little bit about the same topic, of this being comprised of small businesses.
Sure. Well, as Chip and David touched on, there certainly seems to be a misconception that the hotel industry is exclusively the domain of big business, and that's been an obstacle on the advocacy side of things. As we've lobbied for various relief considerations, there have been instances where it seems like some policymakers consider the industry too big to fail. And so we really need to do, I think, a better job of educating folks, particularly policymakers, lawmakers, about the small business foundation of the industry. And we need to find ways to better amplify the stories of the local and regional owner operators, the kind of folks that Chip mentioned, who have built a business and are living their dream, and put a face, put a voice to those folks within the industry, so lawmakers don't assume mistakenly that Marriott owns every courtyard that they drive by from point A to point B.
Absolutely critically important. And that is definitely one of the priorities of AZLTA moving forward, is to better educate on how complex and intricate this industry is. So we will really be working on that moving forward. Let's transition into the topic of tools, resources that are going to be critical to stabilizing this industry and then positioning us for recovery. I think we all have seen that President Biden earlier this month signed the American Rescue Plan into law. And of the $1.9 trillion, $350 billion is going to be flowing to the states, local, and tribal governments to address the fiscal impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And with nearly every state in the country in the midst of their legislative sessions, I think right now is a prime opportunity for us to indeed tell the story of the majority of this industry being small business, and the need for relief, and how to help us in channeling those funds to our small businesses. Chip, I'm going to start with you. I think you've been at the tip of the spear in advocating for this relief. And again, thank you for your efforts. Can you talk about the American Rescue Plan and what you see for the industry?
Well, as was mentioned, there was nothing specifically for hotels inside that rescue plan like there was for independent restaurants. And I think it's, keep in mind, it's not chain restaurants, it's just independent restaurants, but I think it highlights again the struggle that we talked about. There are so many in our industry who built their business literally living in their hotels as they continue to build that business. They're raising their family in the hotel over the years until they got to a place where they could buy their second hotel. That is the American dream story. And yet Congress seemed to want to dole out money to these, I'll call them what they are, celebrity chefs who already made it quite well elsewhere because it might be their favorite restaurant that they go to. And I'm all in support of anybody in our industry, broadly defined, including restaurants, getting as much help as they can because they need it. But so does the independent hotelier. Now, inside this bill, there is one portion of money that we think is very helpful and it's very critical that we move on right now. And we as an organization, along with Travis and everybody else, we're engaging on this at this very moment, and that is the set aside money for hospitality and tourism. Kim, you talked about the $350 billion that was allocated to states and local governments and tribal governments. Inside of that, there is a portion of that where there's a mandate for a bit of it, 25%, not of the whole $350 billion, but 25% of a portion of it, to go towards hospitality and tourism spending. And so what we're trying to do is, first of all, alert lawmakers to the fact that this pot of money exists, and then B, encourage them to do direct grants to hotels so that hotels can use this to address the operational issues, whether it be property taxes or debt service or employee payments that they need to make right here and right now. That is so important. And there's some great examples out there. Maryland has done direct payments to hotels. The city of Washington, D.C. just set up a program to do it based on a per room basis. And so we know there's some models that work, and we're just trying to get the other states, all the states, to take a look at this money and use it in the best way possible.
Great point. And as you mentioned, there's some great examples across the country. I was on a webinar that HNLA hosted just a couple of days ago. So hearing about what other states are doing and the success they're having is very inspiring and encouraging. So I'm going to look to some of those models to implement. David, if I could go to you to share your thoughts on the American Rescue Plan and what we can do, particularly here in Arizona, to advocate for this industry and get in front of the policymakers to impart upon them the dire need for these small businesses to get assistance.
Well, I've talked to a fair number of government officials, including the federal government. And what struck me was there were only a few things that resonated with them. The first is the plight of the small businesses. And secondly is a job loss. When you think about the national average being around 6% and the industry job loss is in the 40–50% range, it's just absolutely staggering, and that would get their attention. The third one is about the tax revenue. So those three things we have to really make very clear. And we also need to be clear about our objectives. Number one is, I think, financial relief. It's about making it. It's about survival of the small businesses. The other one is about recovery. How do we recover from this pandemic? And it's about promoting travel. It's about tax credit. It's about opening up our borders and welcoming the international travelers. So I think those things we have to make very clear. And I also think you hit the nail on the head, Kim. It's not a battle that would be successful with just Chip or you or Travis or just a few of us. It's a battle that we all have to be all in. We all have to do our share. We all have to talk to our respective congressional leaders, and that's how we can win this battle.
Absolutely. It's the coalition building that I will say has been incredibly helpful over the course of the last year. And Travis, I'm going to shift to you on this and ask you your perspective as well. But first, again, compliment you and Marriott International for all you've done to partner with us here and help educate policymakers on a number of policies that would have been incredibly detrimental to this industry at a time when we can least afford it.
Yeah, absolutely, Kim. And so just to piggyback a little bit on what Chip discussed with respect to the ARP and the language within it, that speaks to funding for travel, tourism, and hospitality. It's going to be important that we are very vocal about the fact that that language is in there, because folks don't read those statutes line by line, contrary to what you might think would be common. And so being quick to point out that we know it's in there and making sure that they know it's in there. And another part of this, it's hospitality. The hotel industry is a big component of travel and tourism, but it's not the only component. So to the extent that we would like something that is, hotel industry specific in terms of grants or reliefs, we really need to be proactive in offering relief concepts and ideas that are packaged and ready to go for these state lawmakers and decision makers as they are evaluating what to do with what they're allocated. Almost like developing a turnkey relief template for states that they can quickly use to establish criteria for eligibility, the permitted uses of these funds for hotels that receive them. And Chip's absolutely right. We do have templates in places like Maryland. Being headquartered in Bethesda, we worked very closely with the State Department of Commerce to sort out the criteria and find permitted uses that make sense and could maximize value to hotels. So while there are a few examples, only a few that we can model off of, they are there. And I think it's important that we move quickly to try and replicate those in other states with this money that's now available.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be very, very important. And something else that I would like to shine a light on is that while we're always advocating for increased investment by the state in tourism promotion, with these dollars, I think very, very important to diversify the investment, if you will. So, for example, in the last round of CARES Act dollars, our Governor Ducey, did indeed make a very generous investment into the Arizona Office of Tourism to market the destination. But again, right now, our businesses need to be able to keep their lights on, service the debt on their mortgage for the next month. So we've got to shore up these businesses that we want to be viable businesses in recovery. So again, yes, important to invest in tourism promotion, but very, very important to shore up these small businesses. One other thing I'd like to highlight in Arizona is that this is the only industry with a positive economic impact in all 15 Arizona counties. We've got small businesses in every corner of the state, and a lot of these communities are entirely reliant upon travel and tourism, the lifeblood of these small communities. So again, each of these areas has their respective destination marketing organizations that is charged with marketing and promoting their unique assets in different parts of the states. So I think very, very important that we get money to these 501c6 nonprofit entities that are going to be charged with ideally marketing us out of this. I would like to talk a little bit more about ROI and this industry, because here in Arizona, estimated tax revenue from visitor spending supported nearly 10% of our state's general fund, totaling more than $1.2 billion. And local economist Jim Rounds of Rounds Consulting recently put out a report that pointed to data showing that for every $10 million invested in tourism promotion, $100 million is generated. So as a policymaker, you really want to pick a sure thing to invest in with the dollars, use your state dollars wisely. I think this is the place to do it. So I'd love to ask each of you your thoughts on that, marketing the industry and marketing our way out of this devastation. Chip, I'll start with you.
Well, look, our DMOs do an amazing job. We've proven time and again, whether it's marketing the US as a global destination through Brands USA, or marketing individual states as a destination, or marketing individual cities as a destination, that it absolutely works. I think that Arizona, and I'm sorry if you hear all the cracking behind me, we've got a thunderstorm where I am, so if I lose you, I apologize. I think Arizona's in a very unique position right now, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's important for everyone to remember policy matters. The job that your governor has done and your legislature has done, making sure that Arizona stays open, is having a significant positive impact right now. Just this last weekend, I was in your lovely state. I was in Scottsdale, and I was at the Barrett-Jackson Auto Auction, which, by the way, is going on all week. If you haven't ever been, you need to go. It is one of the best events in America. But it was absolutely wonderful. And even when I got home, I continued to see ads for Phoenix, Arizona. And as you guys know, particularly you, David, the weather there is absolutely stunning right now. And you're open for business, and that makes a big, big difference. I'll give you one example that I've been trying to share with the media and policymakers over the last month to absolutely prove that what they do makes a huge difference on the bottom line. Typically in the month of February, you have the cities of Tampa and Miami on one side of the country. You have LA and San Diego on the other side of the country. I'm not forgetting Phoenix, but I want to compare these two as places where it's still warm and people in February will go to because the rest of the country is freezing, right? If you go back and look historically, those cities march in lockstep with very high occupancy rates during February. I looked at the STR numbers this year. Miami and Tampa combined are running 19 percentage points higher in occupancy than San Diego and Los Angeles. Now, the weather was the same. The desire to travel was the same. In fact, all the controllable factors were the same except for one thing: policy. Florida has a "we're open for business" sign. California, for the most part, has had a "we're closed for business" sign. And so that makes an enormous difference. So what Phoenix has done, what Scottsdale has done, what all of Arizona has done to say that we're open, come play golf, come to the Barrett-Jackson Auto Auction, come enjoy this amazing weather. It makes a difference, but you got to market it. It doesn't happen by osmosis. You have to market it. And so those efforts, especially at a time like this where you can capitalize on other states being closed, it will make a difference.
Most definitely. David, I'd love to go to you and get your thoughts on the idea of investing in tourism promotion and what that means for your businesses.
Well, I totally agree with what Chip said. The policy making does make a huge difference. And there are all kinds of studies that the American Hotel Lodging Association through the foundation have done that can provide us with great statistics to make this point. From my perspective, I think anytime you get people into our hotels, it creates a trickle-down effect. You think about all the shops and restaurants and bars and all the vendors that count on the hotel industry. I think it's easily, if we created one job in our hotels, it's 9 more jobs created because of all the other industries that depend on the hotel industry. So as I was saying before, if we want to make an argument with government officials, what get their attention is job growth, especially at this time.
Most definitely. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And we know we have a robust workforce, devastatingly so many of them out of jobs right now, and critically important that we get people back to work. Travis, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Sure. Well, to build on what David was just saying, when you look at why it's such a valuable return on investment, you think about the multiplier effect that gets triggered when someone comes into the state, a visitor, a traveler comes into the state and stays at a hotel. And building a coalition, I think, of stakeholders and businesses that can attest to their success being linked to or in some way dependent upon the business that's derived from visitors and folks staying at hotels, right? The small business retailers, restaurants, attraction sites, emphasizing that the travel industry, the hotel industry success contributes to their success, proving that the rising tide metaphor is applicable here, and that in many ways the hotel industry is the waterline that supports some of the other ships to continue on the metaphor. So I think that's incredibly important, and being able to build a coalition that can attest to that fact, and again continue to educate folks on why that return on investment is so valuable. And one other aspect of this that's important, I think it's also a way, drawing that connection, emphasizing that ripple effect, is also a way to avoid being picked on for occupancy tax increases, right? To some, occupancy tax are low-hanging fruit. If you need more revenue, it's a politically convenient way to raise it. But lawmakers need to understand the economic ripple effect that they would be disrupting if you are making it more costly for visitors to come to Arizona.
Absolutely. Something I'd like to point out, Chip, you talked about Barrett-Jackson, phenomenal event here in Arizona. We also happen to be in the midst of spring training, Cactus League spring training. And I just saw a recent report that shows that 6 out of 10 visitors come from out of state to attend Cactus League spring training. And of those that come for spring training, a third of those visit other places throughout the state. So talk about that multiplier effect. They come to spring training, they're eating in the restaurants, shopping in our stores, but then they're also traveling throughout the state, which I think is very, very important.
Oh, it's monumental, and you know what spring training means to Arizona, just like what it means to Central and Southern Florida. Without naming the brand, because I love all hotel brands, well, all that are members of HLA, which is just about everyone. The hotel I stayed at just this past weekend, was located directly across the street from the stadium that houses both the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Colorado Rockies. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's in the Talking Stick area of Scottsdale. And those restaurants that were there, that's connected, there's a lot of shopping and restaurants up there, they're all being fueled by the people that are staying in those hotels to go to those baseball games. In addition to that, Travis was mentioning all these other jobs, and David was mentioning the jobs. A perfect example, I was talking to one of my many Uber drivers this last weekend. The amount of money that he was making this weekend of shuttling people between the hotel up to the car show, to the baseball games in and around town. This one Uber driver showed me on his app. He said, "Look, I've worked 21 hours this week and I've made $1,100. That's $55 an hour for somebody driving an Uber. That's a good job, particularly at a time like this." And so the additional impact of having hotels open, having baseball open, having massive car shows open, having these restaurants open. It all works together. And that's why it's so important for policymakers to send a consistent message, because the reality is this. If I'm booking a trip to Arizona and I know that Arizona's economy is open, that means I know I get to go to the baseball games and I can go to outdoor events and I can go rent an ATV. But if I'm looking at California and I'm saying to myself, well, I don't know if anything's going to be open, so why book the trip? Well, then it starts to cast doubt into my mind. And that's why consistent policy and messaging matters so much.
Most definitely. Um, David, I'd love to go to you and get your thoughts.
On policy making or what?
Well, yes, on marketing and having that consistent message to the rest of the world that Arizona is open, and having that consistent information. I'll go to Travis in a minute to talk about getting consistent information with regard to vaccinations, but talk about what that consistency in messaging means to you and your businesses.
I think we all need to be, if we are going to talk to government officials, I think we need to be very consistent in our messaging. As I was trying to say earlier, we have to make the case that it's about jobs, it's about tax revenue, it's about saving small businesses. And it's also about not just recovery, but not just about survival, but also about recovery. And I would again urge everyone to look up the foundation's work, the HLA Foundation's work on this topic, how this trickle-down effect on the economy is greatly multiplied with just more people staying in the hotels.
So I'm going to pivot here slightly and go to the topic of vaccinations. And Travis, again, compliments to you. You have been so helpful to us and helping to get clarity on the rollout of vaccinations and where our workforce falls with regard to prioritization. Just this last Monday, our governor announced that everybody 16 and up was now eligible. So that's good news for us. But I know you work with states across the country, and maybe you can talk about what you're seeing in some other states and your efforts to indeed impress upon our policymakers the vital importance of prioritizing our hospitality workers. They are indeed essential. They are indeed on the front lines. They're welcoming visitors. They're interacting with people. They're handling luggage. They're cleaning rooms. They're housing first responders. Some that are being quarantined. So talk a little bit about your efforts with regard to vaccinations.
Sure, glad to, and certainly it's the role of the vaccine here, right, is important both from the perspective of getting back to normal, restoring business, but also on ensuring that our associates, the folks that work in our hotels, are able to do so after being inoculated and can do so safely. And when you look at sort of the vaccination prioritization process that's been underway broadly, it's been somewhat, I would say, disjointed, and that's presented a lot of challenges as we try to advocate for appropriate placement or prioritization of hospitality workers in one of those phases. And if you look at how things sort of started out, the CDC issued some recommendations in the December, January timeframe. What we didn't see in the first publication was hotel or hospitality workers listed explicitly. In a number of states, we found, we were told that because the CDC's recommendations didn't reference them, that they were not going to include them in one of their priority phases. And I want to credit AHLA and the efforts that they undertook to engage with the CDC and ultimately got more detailed guidance, what they called an industry map, that showed travel accommodations being a recommended field for prioritization. Due to AHLA's efforts in advocating with the CDC, that was released. We were able to take that information to a number of states where, by virtue of that, we were immediately added into a priority phase. And so HLA did an incredible job in advocating with the CDC there. And then just after that, the partnership of HLA with Unite Here, and a joint letter that was signed by Chip and the Unite Here president, Dee Taylor, advocating for appropriate placement for hotel workers. And maybe a week or two, Chip, after that letter was disseminated to governors, I think there were at least 3 or 4 more states that added hotel workers in a priority phase. And I feel like I'm kind of stealing your thunder here, but I also want to give credit where credit is due. But to talk about some of the major milestones in getting hotel workers into the conversation in various states, and there's still work to be done because every state is doing it differently, and it's still a challenge. But we certainly encouraged to see that more states are opening it up more broadly. But to the successes we were able to have on behalf of industry workers was in large part due to the efforts of HLA. And maybe Chip, I'll throw it to you to talk a little more about that.
Well, thanks, Travis. And look, the leadership that companies like Marriott have shown, Best Western. I mean, Marriott offered paid time off for people to go get vaccinated. That's a strong encouragement, I can promise you. And when you couple that with what's actually happening in the marketplace right now, where you've got, I'm looking at my screen, West Virginia, Alaska, Utah, Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, Indiana, Arizona, who are all now giving the vaccine to everybody age 16 and above. What this means is the encouragement of employers to facilitate this for their employees is critically important. So we thank you and everybody that's involved in this in making sure that we're putting our priorities with our employees to get this job done and get it done quickly. The rollout is happening. I think this is a beautiful example of seeing how it works well in some states, and in some states it doesn't work well, and that's really the way we should always operate, and look at the states that are doing things the right way and emulate them. Look at the states that are not doing things the right way and not emulate them. But this is happening. The industry and individual members of AHLA, like Marriott, like Best Western, have led the way, and we appreciate that. But boy, when we can send the message that 80–90% of hotel workers have been vaccinated, that creates a confidence among consumers that we haven't seen since last February, and that's really important.
Perfect transition into my next topic, and that is indeed establishing consumer confidence. And Travis is correct, credit where credit is due. Chip, you and your team have led from day one. From the moment this pandemic hit, you rolled out your Safe Stay initiative, an initiative in partnership with all the national hotel brands and the CDC. Fantastic success, and really that first step in demonstrating to the world the extent to which this industry is going to ensure that our consumers and our employees know that they're in a safe and clean environment. And AZLTA piggybacked on your program and created our AZ Safe and Clean initiative, which has been rolled out and has had great success. And it is very important in reestablishing that consumer confidence, letting our visitors know that when they come, an industry that is already the pinnacle of health, cleanliness, safety standards, has risen the bar and taken it a step higher. So compliments to you on Safe Stay. And Chip, if I could stay with you here for a minute to talk a little bit about Safe Stay and what that has meant to the industry in getting the word out to consumers about the measures that the hotel industry is taking.
Well, we look at Safe Stay kind of like open source best practices for safety and cleaning. And when it started, our goal was really threefold. First, to send the message to consumers that hotels are safe and clean. To send the message to hotel employees that hotels are safe and clean. And third, to send the message to policymakers that we got this. Like, we're doing this. We don't need mandates. We're ahead of you on this one, as we normally are. And we're working with the CDC to make sure that hotels are as clean and safe as any business out there. And so that's where we started. Just recently, we released the 5th version of Safe Stay. And I urge everybody to take advantage of this. It's free. You can go to our website, you can get it, you can use it, you can build upon it, you can improve upon it like Kim and everyone in Arizona did. But the 5th version really deals with a checklist for air cleanliness, because that is really critical, making sure that the air in your hotels is very clean and you know it's clean, and how to fix it if it's not. We just recently had a version on that included a checklist for meetings, conferences, and events. And so we've taken these best practices, we've taken the guidelines from the CDC, we've worked with major global vendors like Ecolab to put all this together, and it's free to everybody. So please feel free to use it. We think it's an incredible tool that, again, sends that message to consumers, to hotel employees, and to policymakers that hotels are clean and safe and we're doing the right thing.
Great leadership on that. Absolutely phenomenal. David, if I could shift to you, and Chip, you provide the segue, the transition every time. So thank you for that. As we're talking about easing guidance and the importance of not just leisure travel, but what meetings, group, business, event, convention travel means to this industry, this is going to be critically important because this industry has indeed been leading with solutions. So to demonstrate that we've got this, we have mechanisms in place to ensure a healthy, safe event with social distancing and all of the protocols that are in place. David, I'd love to ask you about Best Western and your efforts. What do you see on the horizon for your hotels as we begin to ease guidance and the critical component of business meetings, group events comes into play again?
Yeah, Kim, it's a really important segment. And really, if you think about the hotel industry, there are four important segments. There's leisure, there's corporate travel, there's meetings and events, and there's international arrivals as well. All four are important. And depending on the hotel, one is more important than the other. In terms of meetings and events, I'll tell you a first-hand experience. We're trying to plan a meeting for 200 people. And Las Vegas right now is offering some incredible rates. So we said, oh, great, let's go to Las Vegas. Well, guess what? For 200 people, we are required to be in a ballroom that's 20,000 square feet. 20,000 square feet for a 200-person meeting. Can you imagine what that ballroom is going to look like? And how are you going to have a productive meeting? And that's that vast of space, right? So needless to say, we went up to Texas. We're going to have a meeting in Dallas where we can have a meeting as almost as normal. And that goes to Chip's point. Las Vegas is following CDC guidelines, and they say that's the way it is. And Texas is open, and they got the business. So there you go. I think the policymakers really need to keep that in mind. The economic impact of bringing meetings and events back to their cities or their states is so vast, so huge. They have to realize it's tax revenue, it's jobs, it's keeping businesses healthy and vibrant. So it's an important segment, and we need to bend the ears of the policymakers.
Absolutely. And when we are competing and vying for those visitors, those conventions, those business meetings, back to marketing, it's critically important that we equip our DMOs and our Office of Tourism with the resources necessary to be able to compete and position Arizona in recovery. Travis, I'd love to go to you on the topic of business travel, meetings, events, conventions. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, this is another area where I think, we've been working very hard to educate the policymakers and decision makers on the impact of those types of events on our industry, and to think about the perception of how folks view the hotel industry as being impacted during the pandemic versus the restaurant industry. Some of the restrictions that we've seen, restaurants can't have indoor dining. We all know that is how the restaurants operate. They need to have people coming in, sitting there, eating there. That's how they make their money. Hotels, for the most part, we haven't been told that we can't have guests in our hotels. And I think for the policymakers, we're not stopping you from having guests, but the reason the guests are in the hotels are because of these other events and reasons, these other things that are restricted. So I don't think they've made the direct connection on how some of these restrictions directly impact our industry. But in essence, they've sort of suffocated the supply line of visitors, of travelers through some of these restrictions, and trying to communicate that. And also from a timing perspective, when you look at group and event travel, things are planned and lined up so far out that if folks aren't giving some sort of runway for reopening strategy or process, every month that we wait for guidance on that front, business 6 months out either gets canceled or rescheduled for years in advance. And so that's another thing that folks haven't quite grasped is the timing, the amount of runway that this type of business, this type of travel needs in order to make their arrangements, and what it costs every day that we wait for some inkling of when things might start to ease and restrictions start to be walked back.
Hey, Kim,
Absolutely.
let me jump in there too, because I want to point out that this is the problem we see all across America, is that when policies don't make sense, Americans tend to reject them. I mean, Americans are smart people, they get it. I want to use David's example as the perfect example of a really dumb policy. Very few people drive to Las Vegas. A few brave souls from Southern California, maybe a few from Arizona, but very few people drive. Now, I have flown during this entire pandemic. I think I've done over 60 flights. So I've seen every airline. I've seen how they operate. I'm sitting in a seat to fly to Las Vegas. If I'm coming from Washington, D.C., that's about a 3.5, 4 hour flight, depending on the wind. I'm sitting in a seat with one person 6 inches to my right, 2 inches to my right, and another person like 8 or 9 inches in front of me, and one right behind me. I get off an airplane where I've been inside of a canister, people all around me. I then get into an Uber or Lyft where the driver is going to be maybe a foot and a half ahead of me, in front of me, inside of a car. And then when I get to the hotel, they're telling me, well, you have to have a 20,000 square foot ballroom for 200 people. I think most people look at that and they say, that makes no sense at all. That's really stupid. And you know what? I'll just take my business and go to Texas. And that's how people work. And that's what policymakers don't get. You can't tell me that it's safe for me to sit in the airplane, it's safe for me to sit in the Uber, but it's unsafe for me to be in a ballroom. That doesn't make any sense to people. And so this is where there has to be across the board, from airlines to transportation, whether it be train or car or vehicle, to hotels, there has to be a consistency of policymakers so that the American public looks at this and says, okay, that makes sense. I'm willing to invest my time and money there. And they're doing that in Texas, and they're doing that in Arizona, and they're doing that in Florida, but they're not doing it in Nevada. They're not doing it in New York. They're not doing it in Illinois. And until these policymakers could get their head around that dumb policies cost jobs, they're going to continue to lose jobs.
Absolutely. And you just nailed it. Travis and David did as well. And you talk about policy coupled with planning. Travis really hit on the planning, the runway, he referred to it as, critically important. If a policy change is implemented, it's not like you flip on a light switch and then all of a sudden group meetings and businesses are back. These require months and months, if not years, of planning, reservations, coordination. So it's going to be a long road back on the group travel. And I've heard estimates, I think straight from AHMLA, that we're looking at 2024, 2025 even, before group business meetings, event numbers are where they were pre-pandemic. So it's going to be a long road, but again, policy. And I refer to you as I'll say the Tom Brady of the industry. Thank you for the leadership and work you're doing. I did want to point something out that I thought was interesting. Full recovery. So regarding safely restoring business travel, meetings, and events, full recovery requires the return of business travel, which offers a disproportionate impact to the U.S. economy, accounting for more in total travel spending than leisure travel, 30% compared to 20%, and nearly 40% of lodging and air revenue. So you can see these are big numbers and very, very disproportionate. So getting that business travel and good policy to support that based on the leadership that the industry is taking to demonstrate the healthy, safe, clean environments that we're creating. Hopefully we can get this patchwork pieced together and we'll be off to the races. But talking about timeline, I'd love to get each of your perspectives, your prognostication on our timeline for recovery. What do you think the rest of 2021 looks like for the industry, and what can we anticipate? Chip, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's going to be a regionalized recovery, as I've hopefully articulated throughout this show. If you're in a southern state, if you're in a western state that's open, and you have a lot of outdoor activities in good weather, like right now in Arizona, you're going to recover much quicker than if you're in New York City, a Chicago, or northern state that is unfortunately locked down the whole time, and you rely heavily on large meetings and conventions. And so I think throughout the summer, we've already seen that there's going to be a nice bump in leisure travel. This in some way worries me because I think it sends the message that everything is okay. Policymakers tend to believe that if people go on vacation, therefore the hotel industry is fine. And we have to keep reminding them, as you said from the very beginning, Kim, 60 to 65% of the revenue for our industry is generated by some form of business travel or meetings and conventions and conferences. And so even if we have historic leisure travel in the summer, I'm really worried about post Labor Day and what that means. So it's going to be a regional recovery. The Texases, the Floridas, the Arizonas are going to do well. They are doing well. The New Yorks, Illinois, and others in the state of Washington, they're going to struggle. And I think there's a real danger that a very positive summer, and is shaping up to be that way, is going to lull us into believing that everything is okay with the industry. And then we're going to wake up in mid-October and ask ourselves, where is all the business travel?
Absolutely. David, I'd love to get your perspective. What does the rest of 2021 look like for Best Western?
Well, I agree with Chip. I'm already seeing it in our performance statistics. It's very regionalized, the recovery. It's very regionalized. Obviously, states like Texas and Florida are recovering very, very nicely. California is like among the worst. So aside from that, from a national standpoint, when I first saw the STR forecast some months ago, when they first came out with the 2021 forecast, I think they said that the industry was going to be up in RevPAR about 25%. I was asking myself how that was going to be possible. And certainly, if you look at the first few months, we're way down, even compared to, 2020, the first couple of months were fairly decent, pretty strong, in fact, for our company. So when you're comparing to that, obviously we're going to be down, but March is not panning out to be as good as 2020 right now. And so we have a deep hole that we've dug compared to 2020. So now we are going to reverse that. And then probably by June we'll be even. And then you only have 6 months to make that yearly increase of 20%. That means, roughly, you got to be up 40% in the last 6 months. And to me, that's just not possible given the continued restrictions in a lot of states. The vaccine rollout has definitely helped speed things up. It's given confidence to people. And I got my 2 shots and immediately I felt like freedom. I got this overwhelming sense of freedom and I want to travel. And that's great. And that bodes really well for leisure travel. But you mentioned earlier, the corporate travel segment is so vitally important to the industry. So until the offices reopen, it's hard for that segment to come back. And also on top of it, a lot of companies from the ones that we talk to are concerned about liability protection. For as long as they don't have liability protection, they aren't going to send their travelers on the road, and they don't even feel safe opening their offices. So these things are tied to liability protection. Until we have that and companies feel comfortable reopening their office, sending their travelers on the road, we aren't going to have a meaningful recovery in the corporate segment or the meeting segment. And then international also is very important for a lot of our gateway locations. And Arizona actually has benefits from that too. And that's another story. We've got to start working with our international partners to reopen up our borders and talk about how we're going to have, whether it's, whatever we end up calling it, health passports or whatever we end up calling it, we have to start working on that now. and try to enable that segment to recover as well. So if you look at how things are going to pan out, it's no wonder it's going to take 4 or 5 years for the recovery. But 2021, I don't think it's going to be as good as we have planned because the corporate segment will continue to be compromised.
And David, you again bring up a great point with the liability. This industry, we've been down this road. We've seen that this industry has indeed been the target of frivolous lawsuits. We saw it several years ago, and the devastation that just our industry with. So I'm very, very proud that Arizona's got a very broad-based business coalition. The vast majority of the business community is behind this liability legislation with this industry in mind. So very, very grateful for that. To as the most public-facing, consumer-facing industry, we know that we will be on the front lines of will back, thus being primed for frivolous lawsuits, if you will. So liability critically important. Travis, I'd love to go to you and get your thoughts on what the rest of 2021 looks like.
Yeah, I guess my hope is that 2021 will continue to see some incremental improvements, separate and apart from what we expect to see in some of these regional bumps for the the leisure, the typical leisure season. People much smarter than me are, as you pointed out, Kim, projecting that full recovery is still 2 or 3 years out. Given everything that's going on with vaccinations, it feels like the next 3 to 4 months will be really important. And if the supply is flowing and these decisions to open up eligibility to all adults are going smoothly, folks are signing up and there's no major interruptions, I think that would really help play a determining role in whether we can hit a point of substantial recovery on the front end of that projection versus the latter end. And I do think the vaccination effort and some of the states that have been slower to reopen and have been more conservative with their policies, that success through vaccination efforts over the next 4 months may get them to a point where they're more comfortable opening up and letting things go, even if there are a few spikes here and there. So I think the vaccination effort over the next 3, 4, 5 months, I think will really be an important factor in determining what the longer term recovery period looks like.
Absolutely. We're going to go into the speed round now. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to give each of you the opportunity. If there's anything that I had not asked or covered, I'd love for each of you to have 30 seconds to share with us anything you'd like. David.
What we haven't talked about is really how consumer behavior and expectations will evolve as we come out of this pandemic. And it's interesting to see how many trends that we are seeing right now. For example, all of us have apps on our phone, and we know we can order food within a minute and pay for it, and then the food will be ready for us at the restaurant. And that sets new expectations as to how people are going to transact with our hotels. Mobile is becoming so mainstream now, and it's not only reservations, it's expectations as to what people want to do with their phone. I think that's one. The other one is about housekeeping. And for our segment of business, breakfast, those things are also going to be evolving. And it's interesting to see how things pan out.
And that's a great point. Topic for a future webinar is employment and filling our workforce pipeline, something that we really have to pay attention to into the future. Just 1 minute left. Chip, give you the last word, and then I'll go to Travis.
Real quick, a positive sign, I think this idea of workcation has really caught on, and that could really benefit our industry long term. If people recognize they can work from their hotels, which they're doing now, that means they can travel more and spend more time in hotels. That's the good part. Second part is a follow-up on something that David said. This is what really concerns me. We're going to have a hard time getting business travel back until people get back into offices. If I'm going to go have a meeting with somebody in San Antonio, I'm not going to go hang out at their house most likely. I'm going to go to their place of business. And if they're not at their place of business, then I may not take the trip. And so getting those offices reopening, getting the vibrancy of our downtown areas going again is really critical to business travel.
I guess I'm actually giving you the last word.
Thanks. I just want to say that, it's certainly been a trying year for the industry and everybody in it. But to see, Kim, to borrow the word that you used in our conversation before we started, to see the resiliency of the industry throughout this, this year and change period. The past year has tested us in so many ways we never expected or could have planned for. And I think the way that the industry has been able to adapt under pressure to make critical decisions in many instances without clear information is a testament to the resiliency of the industry and the people that comprise it.
Very well said. An incredibly resilient industry. And I thank all three of you, extraordinary leaders in this industry. Thank you for joining us today, sharing your thoughts on so many important topics. I also want to thank, again, today's sponsor, HSL Properties. Without the generosity of these investments, the programming and the advocacy ceases to exist. So again, thanks to each of our panelists, and thanks to each of you for joining us today. Stay tuned for a future Tourism Talk webinar, dates to be released shortly. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again, everybody.